This video is sponsored by the International Society for Primal People. First, it was the late 50s activity in Northern California. Then a bit of movie film footage was shot by Roger Patterson. This was in 1967, and the Bigfoot saga began to take on reality as more media attention came and more believer came as well. As more and more roads were constructed to open up more timber country in Northern California, Bigfoot stories erupted in the late 1950s. From the stories coming out of the region about workers seeing huge, human-like footprints and 55-gallon oil drums tossed around when they would return to work, we were soon hearing reports of other Bigfoot appearances. Soon, people were becoming quite involved in the search for this creature, which some continue to believe is only a myth of Indian legends. These people included the late Roger Patterson and his writing partner Bob Gimlin from Yakima, Washington. Up in British Columbia, others were to join forces in some cases, or go two separate ways in others. Objective in either case was to find Bigfoot, or Sasquatch as the Canadians called it. Men like John Grain, Rene DeHinden, and Bob Titmus soon gained widest recognition for their expertise on Bigfoot. All have been to Walla Walla in the Blue Mountains as the search for Bigfoot went into high gear following the sighting in 1982 by Paul Freeman. Patterson and Gimlin, renting a 16mm movie camera, launched their 1967 search on isolated Bluff Creek out of the small mountain town of Willow Creek, California, east of Eureka. Patterson's film has been controversial in some quarters and hailed as the real McCoy in others. Certainly, the frames he captured of what appears to be a female Bigfoot seemed authentic. While Patterson died an untimely death a few years after the filming episode, his partner, Bob Gimlin, lives today at Yakima and remembers quite vividly, with no doubts about what he saw that day on Bluff Creek. That memory was recalled when I received my copy of the delayed autumn issue of the ISC newsletter, publication of the International Society of Cryptozoology. Following is a story I did from that article. The ISC newsletter printed an excerpt from a Seattle newspaper which had run an interview with a man who probably should rate as the forgotten man of Bigfoot Chronicles, Bob Gimlin of Yakima. Bigfoot aficionados will recall the name Gimlin all right. He was the partner of the late Roger Patterson, a prime mover and shaker in investigations about Bigfoot in the 50s and 60s, and who gained a lasting footnote to fame with his photography of movies of a Bigfoot. Patterson died in 1972, just 5 years after that Bluff Creek, California episode shared with Gimlin. While the Patterson film has been labeled hoax by debunkers, it is also called the best evidence on record by several, including some scientists. What are Gimlin's feelings today, more than 20 years after he and Patterson spotted the huge hairy creature striding up the creek bed? Here is an excerpt from the Seattle PI article as carried by the ISC newsletter. I'd have been better off if I'd have said a long time ago that I believe it was a man in a fur suit because I took so much ridicule about it, said Gimlin, who has never profited financially from the film. But Roger's been dead a long time now, so I kind of feel I owe it to people to tell about what we saw. We made the bend in Bluff Creek in Northern California, and here this thing stood by the creek. Just stood. We were on one side of the creek and the creature on the other, and our horses went crazy. Roger's little horse just went bananas. Patterson then reportedly grabbed the movie camera from his saddlebags. As all this was going on, Gimlin continued, this creature turned and started to walk away, just slow, like a man would if he was just walking down the street. But as it did this, Roger ran across the creek behind it, but then he stumbled on a sandbar. It was all happening boom, boom, boom. He was shooting the camera while he was running. He hollered, "Cover me!" And naturally I knew what he meant. So I rode across the creek on my horse and took my .30-06 rifle out of the saddle scabbard and just stood there, but not aiming the rifle at the beast. When I did this, said Gimlin, this creature was quite a little ways from me, about 90 feet, and it turned as it was walking. It never stopped walking. And then I heard Roger say, "Oh my God, I ran out of film." What he'd been doing was taking scenery-type pictures all the way up to the creek site. Does Gimlin believe the Sasquatch today? There's no question in my mind. None whatsoever, he stated. The Bigfoot story was soon being told in book form, and many have since written on the subject. A bibliography of several good Bigfoot Sasquatch books will be included in this book. One of the very earliest to tell the Bigfoot story in a book was the British Columbia newspaper publisher John Green. His fine book, On the Track of the Sasquatch, should be read by all who find this subject of interest. His first one was done in 1968, providing much history and lore about the Sasquatch, including pros and cons on the matter of belief. DeHinden soon followed in 1973 with his book Sasquatch, including several pages of photos, as does Green's book, by the way. DeHinden's book includes several frames of the Bluff Creek film. Yes, Bigfoot, legend or fact, gained credulity as time passed and more media exposure came. The 70s were highly productive, and a worldwide organization of scientists was organized. A portion of the thrust being to investigate as thoroughly as possible the Bigfoot issue. A highly interesting Bigfoot feature appeared in the December 8, 1974 Northwest edition of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, written by freelance writer Ilona Koidal. Here we find an early reference to Gigantopithecus and the possibility that this link in the chain of man's evolution still roaming the earth in the guise of Bigfoot. In her article, Koidal quotes two anthropology instructors who share this belief. Ula Moody of the Edmonds Community College and Grover Krantz of Washington State University. He, Bigfoot, would have to be a Gigantopithecus, Moody said. He could easily have immigrated across the Bering Land Bridge during the Pliocene and Pleistocene eras. Teeth and jaw fragments of Giganto have been unearthed in China since the 1920s. Many found embedded in Pliocene and Pleistocene sediments of 1 million years ago. What the fragments came from, Moody said, was a Giganto. It is in the same superfamily as man, and would weigh in the 700 to 900 pound range and be 8 to 10 feet tall, and those numbers, of course, fit Mr. Bigfoot of the Blues to a T. Krantz was several years ago a believer in the Giganto theory, the Koidal article pointed out. A recent book, 1990, tells of the search for evidence of Giganto in northern Vietnam. The book, Other Origins, tells of expeditions of 1988 and 1989 to probe the question of Giganto and his demise. Who or what was he, and how did he become extinct? Did humans have a role in that extinction? A Vietnamese anthropologist suggests early man hunted down the giganto and killed them to the point of extinction, but not before some made their way across the Bering Land Bridge into North America. Considerable credence for the Bigfoot came in mid-1975 with the official recognition of the creature in the Northwest by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The story was reported by Associated Press with a Spokane, Washington dateline in the Walla Walla Union Bulletin for July 6, 1975. Though branded as a myth by some, Sasquatch is described in detail in the Washington Environmental Atlas, a $200,000 Corps project designed to assist government and private planners. Also known as Bigfoot, the animal is reported to feed on vegetation and some meat, the atlas says. Sasquatch, it says, is covered with long hair, except for the face and hands, and has a distinctly human-like form. The Corps, which discusses Sasquatch in concluding an atlas section on important wildlife, says the beast is agile and strong, but so shy that it leaves minimal evidence of his presence. The Corps acknowledges that the existence of Sasquatch is hotly disputed. It says that some persons believe that not one piece of evidence will withstand serious scientific scrutiny. However, the atlas also provides a map pinpointing all reports of Bigfoot sightings, and it notes that hair claimed to be from a Sasquatch was found on FBI analysis not to have come from a man-known animal. It says the Sasquatch stands up to 12 feet tall and weighs up to 1,000 pounds and strides up to 6 feet. If Sasquatch is purely legendary, is the legend likely to be a long time dying, the atlas says. Later on, the Walla Walla office of the Corps of Engineers in its newsletter, Intercom, had some commentary worth recalling. The Corps of Engineers may prove to be the salvation of Bigfoot. Bigfoot, also known by the Indian name Sasquatch, is purported to be an 8-foot-tall, 900-pound humanoid that roams the forest and the wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest. Although most governmental agencies scoff at the existence of Bigfoot, the Corps lists the creature as one of the native species for Washington State in the Corps' Environmental Atlas of the state. New species of animals are constantly being discovered. In 1977, a Navy torpedo recovery vessel reeled in what was thought to be a torpedo, but turned out to be a 15-foot representative member of a new species of shark. The shark, named Megamouth because of its bathtub-shaped lower jaw, had an enormous, short-snouted head and 484 vestigial teeth. Perhaps one of the reasons most government agencies play down the existence of Bigfoot can be discerned from several alarmist releases issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Some officials doubt whether any state or federal action, short of calling out the National Guard, could keep order in the area within the first few hours or days of the creature's discovery. The question arises, what if Sasquatch, after it is discovered, is hunted to the point of extinction? This has happened to a number of species of animals, birds, and fish. Under U.S. law, the Secretary of Interior is empowered to list as endangered a species so threatened. Normally, we must know a great deal about a species before we list it, says a spokesman for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Many questions must be answered, he says, such as how big is the population? Does it occur anywhere else? Is the population in danger of decline? One of the first steps in placing an animal on the endangered species list is to recognize the fact that it exists. The only federal agency to do so to date, 1981, is the Corps. The British, however, are a bit more broad-minded about such subjects. A highly respected British scientific journal published a description of the supposed Loch Ness monster, proposing the name Nectaris thumbopteryx. Unlike their British colleagues, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officials will not consider taking action concerning hypothetical creatures. Obviously, if a Bigfoot really were found, we could use the emergency provisions to protect it immediately, a Fish and Wildlife spokesman says. But for the record, I seriously doubt whether such a creature really does exist. Such doubt was not evident, however, at a gathering of scientists in 1978 at the University of British Columbia. Here, the scientists drew resounding applause from the Bigfoot enthusiasts in the audience. Cause for their applause? Dr. Carlton Kuhn, anthropologist and author of The Living Races of Man, waved two wooden models of Sasquatch footprints in the air to prove his point. A primate other than man, which is neither ape nor humanoid, is alive in this part of the world, the 71-year-old scientist told the closing session. This startling news was carried by Associated Press out of the meeting in Vancouver, BC, of scientists at a weekend conference on Sasquatch and other phenomena. I use the word startling because this session of scientists interested in Bigfoot, Sasquatch, had convened to discuss primarily this subject. The meeting had been called in Vancouver, BC, largely because the creature had been sighted many times in the Canadian province over several years, and had drawn a lot of attention in the news media. Bigfoot had already been sighted as well in many states from New England to California for that matter. And while Kuhn made the statement of belief in Bigfoot, a few other scientists were on his side. Grover Krantz, associate professor of anthropology at Washington State University, was among them at the meeting and had been a believer prior to the session. He has long been known as the first academic to declare for the authenticity of footprints of Bigfoot and for the belief in the creature's being. Fact, not fiction for that matter. This 1978 meeting of scientists concerning Bigfoot was a first, but it was not the last. Scientists such as Krantz, Kuhn, and others who had leading roles at Vancouver were among the leaders in the organization in 1983 of the International Society of Cryptozoology, a scholarly society geared to being a clearinghouse for information about undetected animals of the world. This came at a meeting of interested scientists and others at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. It was the hope of Krantz and others that the formation of the ISC would help eliminate what was termed the lunatic fringe that had given the Bigfoot study a bad name. Perhaps the society will put things more on a scientific basis, he said. Leaders elected for the ISC included Bernard Heuvelmans of the Center for Cryptozoology at Le Bouilh, France, named president, Roy P. McCall of the Department of Biology, University of Chicago, vice president, and J. Richard Greenwell, secretary-treasurer and editor of publications. While the society is primarily intended for biological scientists, membership is open to all interested persons. Membership shot to 400 or more at the outset and continued to interest numerous people in the world, all concerned with the discovery of undetected animals, which include Bigfoot. Krantz was a founder and member of the board from the outset and is considered the Northwest leading authority on Bigfoot. He was an early investigator of the sighting in 1982 by Paul Freeman, declaring at the time that Bigfoot prints found there proved that Bigfoot existed. Membership in the ISC is $30 per year, and includes a quarterly newsletter as well as an annual publication. Greenwell may be contacted for membership or other information at P.O. Box 43070, Tucson, Arizona 85733. The telephone number is 602-884-8369. Annual meetings of IFC have been held in many parts of the globe, i.e. Scotland, Vancouver, BC, and Pullman, Washington. Most have been devoted to several elements of cryptozoology. The 1989 sessions on the Washington State University campus gave the entire spotlight to Bigfoot, with speakers coming from U.S. and Canada. My column in the Walla Walla Union Bulletin featured the highly interesting highlights of that gathering. And so the beat goes on. So continues the search for facts about the Bigfoot phenomenon in spite of interruptions from outside sources prior to membership meeting of the International Society of Cryptozoology in Pullman the past weekend. Gaining most of the headlines were the interruptions, but the meeting of the Society provided a forum from which much new information was gained about Bigfoot. Paul Freeman of Walla Walla was the star of the Sunday session. He is more than a claimant to having seen a Bigfoot up close in 1982. He has added 3 more sightings since then. The most recent was last fall, 1988, when he and son Dwayne saw one, and Dwayne recorded its image on film. When Freeman showed this film and some comparisons Sunday, then displayed a twisted sapling tree he brought down from the house, as many of the 100 or so attending milled about the speaker when his presentation ended. Freeman, scheduled to appear on the first day of the 2-day event, was visibly upset when he learned of the arrest of Eric Beckjord of Malibu, California. The California Bigfoot researcher was to aid Freeman in his slide presentation. Beckjord was released Saturday and showed Bigfoot material that evening at another gathering in Pullman, not part of the ISC proceeding. Freeman, after reconsideration Sunday, went ahead with his display and report on his findings on Bigfoot in the Blue Mountains. Freeman's findings, by the way, have been monumental over the past 10 years of his almost daily pursuit of Bigfoot. The Freeman presentation was one of several that paraded past the podium for the audience, members of ISC, and friends. A paper by Bruce Davis of Archer, Florida, told of a similar twisted tree findings in Florida. Jim Hukin, St. Helens, Oregon, retired Oregon Fish and Wildlife biologist, told of interesting finds of boulders excavate for hibernating rodents, apparently the work of a family of Bigfoots. R. Pennington Smith of Baltimore, Maryland, reported extensive Bigfoot findings in China and Russia, all similar to the Bigfoots of North America. Thomas Steenberg of Calgary, Alberta, told of investigations of Sasquatch sightings and material around Alberta. One of the most interesting thoughts advanced in the 2-day meeting came from one of those who has been longest involved with the creature. He is John Green, Harrison Hot Springs, British Columbia. Green is author of some books about Sasquatch and has compiled records as complete as anyone's. It was Green's suggestion that a state or federal government set up a commission to study the possibilities of Bigfoot's existence in the state or nation. Maybe 2 groups could band together on this project. In other words, apply the legal possibilities to the solution instead of the scientific, which has been the route to date. It might not work, but what we have been doing isn't working either, Green said as he closed his remarks. In his earlier presentation on the history of Bigfoot Sasquatch, Green provided some other interesting facts which have come to light thus far in the search for the creature. Some of his points include the following. Bigfoot walks upright, but his resemblance to man ends here. The creature has night vision. There is no evidence Bigfoot has a home or uses caves. It has no speech or use of tools. There is no need to consider the animal dangerous. It is not an endangered species, far from it. Bigfoot is one of the most widespread creatures in the world. In case you wonder where Green is coming from, consider this. He has more than 2,000 Bigfoot reports in his files, with more than 2/3 of them being sightings. The rest are reports of tracks. Paranormal aspects of the Bigfoot matter were not made a part of the WSU gathering. ISC concerns itself only with the zoological issues on this subject. The ISC membership meeting was hosted by the Washington State University Department of Anthropology, of which the sometimes controversial Grover S. Krantz is a professor. A paper prepared by Jeffrey L. Gamble, chairman of the Anthropology Department, was read by Donald Tyler, University of Idaho anthropologist. Tyler, in his prefacing remarks, noted the department's support for Krantz being a change from the past. Gamble's remarks noted that if research is conducted honestly, it has a place in the scientific community, while noting that he was glad to see scientific opinion on the Bigfoot matter changing, if slowly. J. Richard Greenwell, secretary of the ISC, noted that ISC has never sponsored a formal meeting on the Sasquatch problem before. Timing of the meeting for the worldwide group in Washington during the state's centennial observation fit well with the states having adopted Harrison Bigfoot as the centennial animal of 1989, Greenwell added. Now, if someone in Olympia will just grab the ball tossed out at the meeting by longtime Bigfoot researcher John Green and give the legal angle a chance. Yes, things had changed in the acceptance of Bigfoot as a valid creature of the country, especially the Northwest, and in particular for Walla Walla country of the Blue Mountains. The activities following the 1982 Freeman sighting will be related in a chronological fashion. The next chapter dealing with the subject from the Forest Service's reaction to the Freeman sighting, and then to stories of some of the people attached to the Bigfoot of the Blues. End of chapter.